Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true, disturbing stories about the Appalachian deep woods. Encounters that will make you think twice before stepping into the deep woods alone. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. I was 21 when my cousin Ren called me about this random old cabin we apparently owned. Ren was always that cousin, laid back but somehow always dragging people into things. He talked like whatever he was doing was already a done deal and you were just catching up. "We go out there," he said, "check the place out, clean it up. Maybe it's a total dump, maybe it's fixable. Could be a rental, could be a hunting cabin. Worst case, we turn it into a hiking base camp. I mean, it's free real estate." I said yes because I needed to get out of town. I've been drowning in noise, school stress, roommate drama, that weird feeling of being stuck and spun out at the same time. So a couple days off grid sounded perfect. Trees, air, silence, no reception. I expected quiet. What I got was the exact opposite. We left on a Tuesday. The drive started like any road trip: snacks, maps, a playlist that kept skipping. Highways became county roads, which became gravel, which turned into a track that looked like it hadn't seen a maintenance crew since before I was born. At one point I looked down at my phone and realized we hadn't had a signal for almost an hour. Ren grinned. "See? Already better." Eventually we parked where the path disappeared completely and hiked the last half mile on foot. Packs tight, crunch of dry leaves underfoot. The trail, if you could call it that, was barely a suggestion. No markers, no signs, just dips in the underbrush where people maybe used to walk decades ago. We hit the clearing around sunset. The cabin looked like it had been swallowed and then partially spat back out by the hill behind it. It sat sunken, as if it had tried to dig itself into the mountain and changed its mind halfway through. Kudzu crawled up the sides and looped over the roof in thick ropes. The front door leaned inward like it was tired of trying. The whole structure was gray and sagging and oddly small, like it had shrunk a little with time. There was no porch, just a broken slab of concrete and a shadow that seemed heavier than it should be. Inside, everything was pine and dust. The walls were paneled in 70s knotty wood, the kind that felt like it could splinter if you stared too hard. The air was dense and damp, as if whatever had once been alive there had left but not entirely. No furniture, no dishes, no anything. Just a stone fireplace and a loft above the main room with a stained mattress half visible through the railings. Ren stepped inside and said, "Man, smells like disco and failure." We laughed, then stayed. That first night we cooked beans on a little fire pit out back. Headlamps flicked on, beers cracked open, folding chairs creaked. It should have felt peaceful, but there was no sound, no crickets, no rustling, no owls, just the fire popping and the occasional creak of Ren shifting. I mentioned it. He shrugged. "Maybe it's just not the season." Then we heard footsteps, slow and heavy, like someone walking carefully through leaves just outside the ring of light. Not deer, not raccoon, 2 legs, pausing between steps. Crunch, pause, crunch. We froze. Ren stared into the woods like he expected something to show itself. I whispered, "Do you see it?" He didn't answer. He stood and turned slowly, like trying to catch a scent. Then the steps stopped. We didn't finish our beers. We went inside and jammed a hunting knife into the latch as a makeshift bolt. The next morning, the woods weren't the same. The path we'd come in on, gone. Not overgrown, not covered up, just not there. We walked in every direction, north, south, trying to retrace our steps. Each time we looped back to the same fallen tree. Massive roots twisted up like veins, the trunk split like a mouth. Initials were carved deep into the exposed roots. Mine, Ren's, and a third set, EL. Neither of us had a clue who that was. We sure as hell hadn't carved anything. Later, Ren worked on the back wall, trying to patch a soft spot in the paneling. He found a hidden compartment behind one of the studs. Inside was a leather collar with a chunk of rusted chain looped through the ring. No name tag, just a round metal disc with a spiral scratched into it, rough and off-center like done with a nail. Ren stared, then tossed it into the woods like it was hot. That night we heard humming from the loft. Soft, uneven, A slow, tuneless melody like a kid half remembering a lullaby. No words, just sound. We didn't check it out. By 3 a.m., the lantern was out. Not flickered, it was gone, dead. The matches were missing from our pack. I had packed 2 boxes. Ren clicked on the flashlight and aimed it toward the loft. The door, which we had tied shut with fishing line, was open wide open. Ren whispered, "Did you hear it come down?" I shook my head. I didn't sleep after that. On the 3rd day, we tried mapping the area. We used string, tied it to trees, tried to make a grid, walk straight lines. No matter what we did, we ended up back at the same tree, same initials, same deadfall. The forest didn't make sense, like it was curling in on itself. We stopped taking our boots off at night. Around midnight, Ren got up to pee and didn't come back. I found him barefoot in the clearing, murmuring to the trees. I said I'd bring it back. I said I would. His voice was wrong, off, like someone mimicking him and getting the cadence slightly wrong. I grabbed his arm. He flinched hard, like waking from a nightmare, and screamed in my face. His feet were shredded. We wrapped them in shirts and duct tape and didn't talk about it. That 4th night I saw it. I woke to a dragging sound, like fabric on wood. I turned toward the window. Something pressed against the slats, a face too pale, too long, only one eye visible. It blinked once, slowly. I didn't move, didn't breathe. When I blinked, it was gone. Next morning, Ren found long, deep claw marks scored across the side of the cabin, perfectly spaced, too clean, not an animal. That afternoon, we sat around the fire pit and found a message burned into the stone under the ashes. 3 sets of initials. And a date, September 19th. It was the 12th. Ren stared and said, "I didn't do that." I didn't answer. That night, something knocked. Not on the door, on the walls. Behind the fireplace, then by the kitchen, then beneath the floorboards. 3 knocks, each one lower. It felt like something was crawling under us. We dragged our stuff into the center of the room, turned off the light, sat in the dark and didn't move. I counted breaths to keep steady, tried not to think about the eye or the humming. Ren whispered, "What do you think it wants?" Before I could answer, the loft door slammed open. Not creaked, not drifted, slammed. Then the stairs groaned. We didn't wait. We ran. We ran. Barefoot, no gear, branches whipping faces, rocks stabbing feet. We didn't care. Somehow we found the car. Both front tires were flat. The windshield looked exploded from the inside. Ren got in, turned the key, and we drove. We didn't talk until we saw the first cell tower blinking through the trees. We didn't talk after that either. My cousin Callan had this way of disappearing into the woods whenever things got too loud in his life. He called it resetting. Said the deep forest helped him think again, like it scrubbed all the static out of his head. Blue Hollow was his usual escape. When he invited me to go with him that August, I said yes before really thinking about it. I wasn't the camping type. I liked knowing where I was when I opened my eyes in the morning, but Callan had that kind of quiet confidence that made you want to prove something. He said we'd be off-grid for a few days. No phones, no maps, just the old routes he remembered from his solo trips. I didn't want to be the one who backed out. So I packed out and told myself it would be a detox. Something to brag about later. Something to shake off the usual. We parked his truck at this washed-out logging road around noon and hiked in from there. The trail, if you could call it that, was really just a dip in the earth where tires had once cut through. Now it was grown over with ferns and soft moss. We followed it until it disappeared into the trees. Then we kept going, tracing a creek that wound its way down the ridge like it knew where it was headed. We followed that water deeper into the woods, stepping over deadfall and ducking under low branches. By dusk, we found a clearing near a bend in the creek. It was the kind of spot people imagine when they think of camping. Flat ground, dry leaves, the whole area framed by tall spruce and hemlock. We dropped our packs and got a small fire going with kindling Callan always carried. That night felt about how I expected it to. Peaceful in a way that didn't quite settle in my chest. I kept telling myself I just needed time to adjust. Later, I left to gather more wood before the light completely vanished. That's when I noticed it. No matter how far I went, the sound of the creek didn't fade. I climbed the slope, stepped around some fallen stones, pushed past the thick patch of rhododendron. Still, I heard it. Same volume, same pitch, like it was trailing me. And when I turned back to camp, what should have taken 10, maybe 15 minutes to retrace only took a couple. It was like the forest folded in on itself when I wasn't looking. I didn't mention it to Callan. Just sat back by the fire and told myself I was tired, that it was my first time really roughing it and I was just off balance. He didn't say much either, just stared into the flames and poked at the logs. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You see those rock piles earlier?" I thought he was kidding. I made some joke about garden gnomes or weird forest art. But he stood up and motioned for me to follow him to the creek. He wasn't joking. Right along the bank were these stacks of stones. Smooth river rocks balanced 3 high. They weren't just randomly placed either. Each stack was about the same size, evenly spaced, all lined up with this eerie kind of care. They looked too intentional, too clean. What really got to me was how warm they were. I picked one up expecting it to be wet or cold from the creek spray, but it felt dry, like it had been sitting in the sun all day. But the sun hadn't touched that part of the forest since late morning. I asked if he thought other hikers came through and made them. Callan just stared at them for a long time. Then he said, "No one comes out this far, not without a reason." We left them alone and went back to camp. The next morning, something was different. Our fire pit, the one we'd built by hand, moving stones, clearing a patch of dirt, was gone. In its place was a new ring, a perfect circle of smooth, flat rocks, arranged with the same kind of precision as those piles by the water. Neither of us had touched it. Callan swore up and down he hadn't gotten up during the night. I know I didn't. We didn't stick around to debate it. We packed up fast and moved out, headed away from the creek, deeper into the trees. Callan thought he remembered a ridge trail that would lead toward an old Forest Service road, but within an hour, we heard the creek again, and by noon, we saw it, running just to our right. Same bend, same sound. It was like the landscape had turned itself around while we weren't paying attention. By the third day, the silence started to feel unnatural. No birds, no insects. Even our footsteps sounded too loud, like the forest was muffling everything else. The air felt heavier too, like it hadn't moved in days. That afternoon, we came across something that stopped us cold. 3 figures were standing ahead on the trail, spaced out evenly, facing away from us. Just there. At first, I thought they were other hikers, but they didn't move, didn't shift their weight, didn't speak, just stood like they were waiting for something. Callan grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Don't move," but I already had. I couldn't take a step forward if I tried. My legs just locked. And then the nearest figure, only about 30 feet away, tilted its head to the side. Slowly, the angle bent too far, way past what a neck should allow. It was like watching a puppet on a loose string. We ran, didn't think, didn't talk, just turned and sprinted back the way we came. Branches tore at our arms and legs. Roots snagged our boots. I slipped once and hit the dirt hard, but Callan grabbed my jacket and yanked me up before I could think twice. The worst part, the sound of the creek never left. I couldn't see it anymore, but I could hear it running beside us, matching our pace. Same distance, same speed. Like it was tethered to us somehow, like it knew. Eventually the trees thinned out into a clearing. We burst into the open and skidded to a stop. At the center was another fire pit. Same perfect ring of stones. Same unsettling precision. It was identical. I felt my stomach twist. Callan stepped forward like he was going to say something, but I didn't let him. I stomped into the circle and kicked the stones apart, scattering them into the brush. One bounced off a tree and cracked in half. "Keep moving," I told him, and shoved his shoulder. We didn't stop after that, just pushed forward through the undergrowth, deeper into a part of the forest that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone anymore. The air grew colder. The trees got closer together. Every step felt like we were being watched. We finally dropped beneath a pine tree that night. Not because we felt safe, but because our legs couldn't take another step. I curled into my sleeping bag fully clothed. Boots on, heart pounding. I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. Every time I blinked, I imagined one of those figures standing over me, head bent, waiting. The ground was freezing, damp. I remember feeling every rock underneath me like it was trying to crawl into my skin. Then morning came, and with it, finally, a sound. Not the creek, tires. Somewhere ahead, a car rolled across pavement. I could barely hear it, but it was real. It was human. We dragged ourselves through the brush, up a shallow slope, and saw it. A narrow road cutting through the ridge like a lifeline. The asphalt looked slick and black in the sunlight. We stumbled onto it like people crawling out of a flood. A truck came around the bend a few minutes later. I didn't even look at the driver, just lifted my arm and waved like my life depended on it. He slowed down, looked us over, muddy, scratched up, probably wild-eyed, and let us climb into the back without a word. We didn't speak on the ride down the mountain. Callan stared straight ahead. I kept my eyes on the trees until they disappeared. I haven't been back to Blue Hollow. Some places don't want to be found. I had picked up a summer job clearing survey lines for a small land company based out of Rensselaer, a little mountain town without a real gas station. The man who hired me, Scott I think, barely looked at my ID. He asked if I could hike long hours, carry gear, and stay out of trouble, and I said yes. The job did not pay great, but it covered my rent and left enough for gas and groceries. They did not care if I camped on site, so I could avoid the daily hike back to the truck, which honestly was the worst part of the job. So I stayed in the woods. The section they gave me to map ran along a ridge between two narrow hollows. There was no cell service, no radio reception, and not even a decent spot to hang a food bag. The ground was steep and uneven, cut through with old dry creek beds and overgrown logging trails that led nowhere. The forest there was thick enough to lose the sun by mid-afternoon. At first it felt peaceful, just trees, bugs, and the occasional squirrel. I found a small clearing about 50 yards from a washed-out trail, flat enough for my little tent and just far enough from the slope that runoff would not worry me. I set up a fire ring with stones and used a fallen log as a seat. It was not cozy, but it worked. The first day was uneventful. I flagged a few trees with bright orange tape, started taking distance notes, and got the lay of the land. My GPS was unreliable. The signal kept dropping, but I knew how to read a compass and use a notebook. I cooked a can of chili over the fire, read a few pages of a paperback, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and wind in the trees. On the second day, things started to feel off. I was marking a line from the old road out to a ridge point, roughly a quarter mile away, a straightforward eastward walk. I tied off tape every 20 or 30 feet, took notes, and counted steps, the usual routine. When I turned back to return to camp, the walk took twice as long. I kept stopping to check my bearings. Everything looked right, but it did not feel right. The ground did not match my notes. The slope was steeper. The spacing between trees was different. The differences were subtle, but enough to make me second-guess myself. By the time I returned, I was sweating and disoriented. I figured I had drifted off course without realizing it. The woods can play tricks on your sense of direction if you are not careful. Still, I double-checked my notes. The line was accurate. My markings were exactly where they should have been, but the distance had somehow stretched. That night I left my pack by the fire like usual, zipped and latched. When I woke, the pack was gone. At first I thought an animal had dragged it off. Then I saw it hanging from a low branch about 15 feet away. It dangled there like someone had lifted it and hooked it over the branch. Nothing was missing. There were no claw marks and no chewed straps. It was not torn or dirty. It had simply been moved, deliberately. I stood staring at it for 10 minutes before I grabbed it down. My gut felt tight, like something was sitting on my chest. I told myself a raccoon had done it, or the strap had caught as it dragged, whatever would let me sleep. By day 3 was smaller things. I was cooking ramen and used my knife to stir the noodles because it worked. I set the knife down on a flat rock next to me, turned to drain the pot, and when I turned back, the knife was gone. Completely gone. I checked the ground, my bag, under the tent, inside the pot, and even my boots. Nothing. Hours later, I unrolled my sleeping bag and felt something rigid near my feet. There it was, my knife, blade closed and tucked along the inner lining like it had been packed there all along. I did not put it there. That night the forest went silent, not quiet, truly silent. No birds, no crickets, no rustling. The stillness pressed in around me, even with the fire burning. I turned off my headlamp and sat in the dark, hoping it was just my ears. The quiet stayed. On the 5th day, I started a new line to the north, taking a fresh path, marking new trees, and tracking my bearings carefully. About 40 minutes in, I saw orange tape ahead. At first I thought it was someone else's line, a remnant of a previous survey. When I got closer, I saw my own initials carved into a tree, the same tape, the same knots, the same bark scrape from when I slipped with the knife. I had somehow ended up in the same place I had been 3 days earlier. Even though I had walked the opposite direction, I stood staring at that tree. My stomach turned and I wiped my hands on my pants to steady myself. My notes were right and my direction was right, but the woods had brought me back anyway. That night I could not sleep. I kept the fire going and sat with my back to a tree because I did not want to be caught off guard. Sometime before dawn I heard a soft rattling. It came from my coffee tin, the one where I kept matches. I grabbed it, thinking maybe a mouse was inside, but the tin felt warm, not hot, just warm. I opened it. Every single match was gone. In their place were 7 small stones, white, smooth, and perfectly round like river rocks. I was at least 10 miles from the nearest stream. I sat holding that tin and stared. In the morning I found footprints around my camp. Bare feet, small and human, forming a perfect ring around the fire pit. There was no trail leading in and no trail leading out, just a circle. I did not follow them. I did not want to know. That night I did not sleep. I heard little rustles and soft taps like fingers brushing tree bark. I could not see anything, and I did not dare turn on my light. I sat with my knife in one hand and the coffee tin in the other, shaking so hard I could barely hold them. On the 7th morning, I woke to find my survey notebook lying open on my chest. It had been zipped inside my bag when I fell asleep. The page it opened to was not one I had written on. The handwriting was neat and unfamiliar. The words were simple. They read, "Not here, not yours." My pencil lay snapped in 2 beside it. That was the last straw. I packed everything, tent, gear, food, without bothering to fold anything properly. I crammed it all into my bag and started walking. The trail back to the logging road was supposed to take 20 minutes. I had walked it half a dozen times. That day, the forest would not let me out. I hiked up a ridge, reached the top, and saw the same slope ahead, the same fallen tree, the same split in the path, over and over again. At one point, I dropped my pack to test it and marked the ground with a big X using a stick. I hiked for another hour, sweating and swearing the whole way. When I finally reached a clearing, my pack was sitting next to that same X. I thought I was losing it. When I finally stumbled out onto the logging road, I almost cried. My watch said I had been walking only an hour, but the sun was higher than it should have been and my legs felt like they had carried me for a full day. I did not stop walking or look back. I followed the road until I heard a truck engine behind me. An older man in a feed cap pulled over and asked if I needed help. I must have looked rough, pale, shaking, clothes dirty and damp with sweat. I told him I was fine. He did not press and he drove on. All the way down the mountain, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I kept waiting to see a flash of orange tape fluttering from the truck bed, as if something had followed me out. That evening, I turned in my gear at the depot and told Scott I was done. A buddy of mine, Darren, had this uncle who owned a long, narrow stretch of land out in the Appalachian woods. He called it a quiet place to clear your head. But it wasn't a campsite, not really. There were 4 of us, me, Darren, Kyle, and Jen. We were all about the same age, freshly out of high school and floating through that strange in-between space where nothing really felt permanent. So when Darren suggested a weekend off-grid, no phones, no distractions, it sounded perfect. Like a little reset before life caught up. That first day had a certain kind of reckless joy to it. We were loud, laughing too much, getting in each other's way while we set up the tents. Jen somehow managed to pitch hers upside down at first, which she insisted was a creative decision. We gathered a bunch of dry branches from the edge of the clearing, built a fire that smoked more than it burned, and roasted hot dogs on sticks we barely cleaned. The smoke stuck to our clothes. Everything tasted like ash and mustard, and we didn't care. The woods felt big but not threatening, more like a massive green backdrop to our weekend getaway. The second day, everything felt a little off. It started with something small. I'd gone down to the creek that sliced across the property to fill our water jug, maybe 5 minutes away. Tops had already made the trip earlier that morning, so I didn't even think about it. Just took the trail we'd worn in and came right back. Only when I stepped into the clearing again, something was missing. My tent. Gone. Just gone. I stopped in my tracks, blinking like maybe I was looking at the wrong part of the clearing. I paced around, checked behind trees, even retraced my steps to the exact spot where I knew I'd set it up, but there was nothing. No collapsed fabric, no broken poles. Just bare ground, like it had never been there to begin with. At first, I thought someone was messing with me. I even yelled, half laughing, half serious, calling out to the others. Darren came out of his tent rubbing his eyes. Jen looked confused. Kyle looked like he was trying not to grin. But they all swore they hadn't touched it. They hadn't even left the clearing. We split up. Fanned out just a little into the trees, calling and checking. Maybe it got blown away. Maybe a bear dragged it off. Maybe, who knows? And then Kyle shouted. One of those sharp, clipped yells that cut through everything. We found it. My tent was standing upright, perfectly zipped about 50 yards deeper into the woods, not damaged, not dragged, just there, sitting like someone had picked it up in one piece and walked it over. Everything inside was exactly where I left it, even my pillow, still a little crumpled from where I'd napped earlier. We stared at it for a long time, then someone, I think Jen, laughed. Just a short, dry chuckle. The kind of laugh that says, okay, that's weird. But if we pretend it's funny, maybe it won't freak us out. We all sort of joined in. But nobody looked at each other while we did. Nobody said what we were thinking. Because what were we supposed to say? That some unseen thing moved a whole tent and set it up like nothing happened? We dragged it back to the clearing, set it down in the exact same spot. That night, we stayed closer to the fire than we had before. The conversation died out fast. We weren't tired, just not talkative. The fire cracked and popped, sending smoke up into the trees. The darkness felt closer than it had the night before. Not thick exactly, but heavy, like it was leaning in to hear better. Then the log split. It made this sharp, snapping noise, like a gunshot, and I jumped up to nudge it back into the fire pit. I was still crouching when I saw it. Another chair, right there in the circle with us. It was a folding chair, thin, metal framed, with this faded burgundy cushion that looked like it belonged in a church basement or a school gymnasium. I froze, looked at the others. Nobody said a word. They were staring too. We hadn't brought it. No one had. We didn't even own a chair like that. It was just there, positioned like someone had been sitting in it, and gotten up for a second, angled toward the flames. Comfortable, intentional. No one moved. I looked around, scanning the trees, listening. Nothing, not even wind in the leaves. The woods were dead silent. No bugs, no birds. Just the low hiss of the fire and the sound of my own breath getting faster. I said we should leave. Right then, pack what we could and make for the Cardar Trail or not. But they hesitated. Darren didn't want to risk getting lost. Jen said we should wait for sunrise. Kyle kept glancing at the chair like he was waiting for it to do something. We argued in whispers, voices tight. Careful, like raising them might wake something up. In the end, we stayed. We didn't touch the chair, just sat there around the fire, trying not to look at it. Trying not to acknowledge that we were sharing the circle with something we hadn't invited. Eventually, we drifted off to our tents, though none of us really slept. I lay there in the dark, staring at the tent ceiling, skin crawling. I felt watched, not in the paranoid way. Not like when you're nervous and your mind plays tricks on you. This was different, specific, focused. Like someone was just outside the fabric, kneeling maybe, breathing quietly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I reached for my backpack. I always kept it zipped shut right beside me. I could grab it without even sitting up, but it wasn't there. I froze, sat up slowly, scanned the tent with my flashlight. Empty, just my sleeping bag and a few crumpled clothes. I unzipped the door and stepped out into the clearing, the beam of my light jittering as my hand shook. And there they were, all four of our backpacks, lined up neatly, side by side, propped upright against a tree, perfectly arranged, each one zipped closed, facing the clearing like they were waiting for inspection. My mouth went dry. Behind me, I heard the others' tents unzip. One by one, they stepped out. None of us spoke. We just stared at the roll of backpacks, like they'd somehow become sacred objects, like touching them would be a mistake. Eventually, Jen whispered, "Did someone?" But she didn't finish the sentence. We already knew the answer. We sat up until dawn, eyes red, shoulders hunched, watching that tree like it might do something else. When the sky finally started to lighten, we didn't say much. We grabbed the bare essentials, phones, wallets, car keys, left the rest. We didn't even try to unpack the tents. We just walked. Fast, no breaks. The trail seemed longer than we remembered, the routes sharper, the slope steeper. Nobody looked back. When we hit the road and saw Darren's car parked where we left it, I nearly cried. The air felt different on this side of the tree line, like it could move again. We piled in without speaking, drove in silence until we saw a gas station, and only then did someone exhale. None of us ever went back. We don't talk about it. Not really. Not even in group chats or jokes. It's like saying it out loud might give it permission. People love to tell stories about those mountains, say they're old, older than memory, that the land remembers things people forget. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. All I know is this: I left everything behind and walked away. That was the only thing I could do. I was broke, bored, and tired of whatever version of life I'd been living back home. So when a friend of a friend mentioned they needed extra hands to help map some land out in the middle of nowhere, I didn't ask too many questions. The pay was solid, and something about being unplugged for a couple months actually sounded good. What I didn't realize then, what none of us did really, was that the deeper you go into those woods, the less they start to feel like someplace you're visiting, and the more they feel like something watching you, deciding whether or not you get to leave. The hike in took almost the whole day. We started early in the morning, packs loaded up, following Tom, the crew lead, along a thin trail that barely existed. Every step took us deeper into trees so thick they blocked the sun, until it felt like we were walking through the inside of a locked cabinet. No cell signal, no noise, no sign of anyone else. It was beautiful, in a way, but not comforting. The kind of beauty that feels like it doesn't care whether you're there or not. We finally made camp on a flat ridge just wide enough to set up 4 tents around a little fire pit Tom had used on previous trips. The ridge gave us a bit of space, but even then the forest pressed right up against us, thick with pine and laurel. The trees leaned into each other, and their roots twisted through the soil like they were trying to claim every inch. When you looked up, you could only see thin ribbons of sky. It was so quiet I kept catching myself holding my breath. I didn't notice it at first, just this weird tension that crept into my shoulders and never really left. I kept expecting birds or bugs or anything, but there was nothing. Just us, moving around, trying to act like it was normal. The crew was small. Tom, who was maybe mid-50s, had done jobs like this all over the country. He was calm and efficient, and always had a compass on him like it was part of his body. The other 2 guys, Eli and Mason, were around my age. Eli was from Arkansas, lean and kind of wiry, always chewing sunflower seeds and talking about some girl he'd almost proposed to. Mason was quieter, more thoughtful, kept a journal, drank instant coffee like it was religion. We didn't know each other before the job, but out there we didn't really have a choice. That first night around the fire, Tom explained what we'd be doing: marking property lines, flagging trees, logging GPS coordinates. Pretty basic. The land didn't technically have an owner, he said. Some old boundary dispute maybe, or forgotten paperwork. We weren't supposed to talk to anyone about it. Just get the job done and head home. I remember thinking that sounded a little shady, but honestly, I didn't care. It felt like something I could handle. Physical work. No bosses breathing down my neck, and no phone buzzing in my pocket. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could just exist. The first couple days were normal enough. We woke early, ate oatmeal or granola bars, set out with flagging tape and handheld GPS units. The work was repetitive. Find a tree, flag it, log the point, move on. It gave me a rhythm, something to focus on. I stopped thinking about anything outside the woods. Then things started to shift. It was our 3rd morning when we noticed the trail we'd cut the day before was off. We'd spent hours hacking through a wall of laurel, tying red tape every 10 yards or so to mark our path. It was fresh, torn branches, footprints in the soft dirt, sweat-soaked shirts. But when we retraced it the next morning, all of the tape was gone. Not just fallen off. Gone. No scraps. No string left behind. No knots on the trunks. The trail itself looked different too, like it had been there for a long time, maybe years. The branches we'd cut were weathered. Our boot prints had faded. The whole thing felt old. Tom squinted at the trees and said maybe wind had taken the tape, or maybe animals, but his voice didn't match his words. He looked like someone who didn't want to believe what he was seeing. I remember Mason crouched by one of the trees we'd flagged and ran his fingers over the bark. "This isn't just a couple hours of regrowth," he said quietly. "This looks healed." Nobody replied. We kept working. But from that point on, something was different between us. We stopped talking as much during the day. The jokes faded. Even Eli, who never shut up, started keeping to himself. I caught him chewing on sunflower seeds one afternoon and just staring off into the trees, like he was listening to something none of us could hear. Then my tent moved. We'd just finished a long day surveying a low, wet section of the forest. When we got back to camp, the fire was still smoldering from the morning, and everything looked untouched, except my tent. It had been shifted a few feet closer to the fire pit. Not dragged or half collapsed like you'd expect if someone pulled it, just moved. Neat, precise, like it had always been there. I looked at the ground around it. No drag marks, no footprints. The dirt underneath was undisturbed. It made no sense. I asked the others if they'd moved it. Tom said no. Mason shook his head. Eli just gave me this look, like he wanted me to drop it. That night, I lay awake, staring at the top of the tent. I kept thinking about how careful the move had been, like someone or something wanted to send a message, but didn't want to scare me off. Not yet. After that, none of us really slept well. Tom admitted one morning over burnt coffee that he'd heard something walking around the camp at night. Not animals, he said. Not twigs snapping or rustling. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. He said they circled the camp just beyond the firelight, and when he called out, they'd stop. Then they'd start again, from the opposite side. The next night, I stayed up to see if I could hear it too. Around midnight, I caught it. Crunch, crunch. Long pauses. The sound of someone walking slowly, like they were testing each step. It started to the left of the camp, near Mason's tent. Then, nothing for a while. Then again, this time behind me. I sat up, heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was one of the guys taking a leak, maybe stretching their legs. But I knew it wasn't. The steps were too slow, too purposeful. I whispered a hello. No answer. Just silence so thick I could hear my own breath. Then, right when I started to convince myself I'd imagined it, I heard the steps again, coming from the opposite side. Like whoever, or whatever, it was had moved around the entire circle of tents without making a sound. I didn't sleep after that. By the second to last week, the job didn't feel like a job anymore. It felt like we were just trying to make it through each day without breaking apart. The forest felt heavier, like it had thickened around us. Distances stretched longer than they should have. Landmarks changed slightly from one day to the next. Paths we'd walked the day before looked unfamiliar. Then came the hollow. It was narrow, hemmed in by steep hills and packed with thick trees. We were flagging trees as usual when I noticed Tom wasn't with us. I figured he'd lag behind, so I picked up the pace to catch Eli and Mason at the ridge. When I got there, Tom was already standing at the top. He looked normal, maybe a little tired. He nodded at me like nothing was wrong. Then I heard him call my name, from the hollow behind me. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just similar. It was Tom's voice. The exact way he said my name when he needed help. Same pitch, same rhythm, same slight rasp. He called again, closer this time. I turned to look. Nothing but trees. The Tom in front of me looked just as confused as I felt. He said my name, quietly, and took a step back. That was it for us. We didn't wait another night. At dawn, we broke camp, left the flagged paths, the GPS logs, even some of our gear. None of it mattered. We just carried what we needed to make it out alive. The forest had tolerated us for a while, but that day, we all felt it shift. My cousin Reed had just inherited a chunk of wooded land out in a place called Blue Hollow. Just acres of untouched trees and undergrowth, sitting there like they had been waiting to be left alone. Reed said he thought he could make something out of it. Just the two of us, a couple machetes, some beer, and enough gear to rough it for a few nights. It was early October when I made the drive out. I remember because the trees were just starting to change color, and the roads were scattered with orange leaves that stuck to my windshield wipers. I spent 6 hours on highways, then another hour or more winding through smaller county roads that turned to gravel and then eventually to dirt. The last few miles did not even look like a road. It looked more like the remains of a creek bed that had dried up just long enough to fool my tires into thinking it was safe. I lost cell service a while before the last gas station, and my GPS gave up completely not long after that. I had to go off Reed's directions after that, written out by hand on a receipt, and somehow I still made it. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on the hood of his beat-up Dodge with his boots up and a beer in his hand. His window was down, and he was chewing sunflower seeds like he always did when he was killing time. He tossed me a beer before I'd even turned off the engine and said, "You ready to disappear off the grid?" The first day was actually kind of great. We started clearing just past noon. The machete sliced through the undergrowth with a satisfying rhythm, and the deeper we got, the quieter the world seemed to become. No traffic, no phones, no people. Just the sound of blade on vine and the occasional call of birds overhead. We made it maybe half a mile before the light started fading, and we picked a spot near a shallow stream to set up camp. No tents, just tarps, sleeping bags, and a small camp stove. We heated up cans of chili, drank warm beer, and spent the evening swapping dumb stories from high school that neither of us had told in years. Reed was always the kind of guy who could laugh with his whole chest. That night, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his chili in the dirt. We were exhausted, but in the good way. The kind of tired that comes from doing something real with your body. That night, he snored like a chainsaw while I lay in my sleeping bag staring up at a sky so black and full of stars it looked fake. The next day started early. We ate granola bars and drank instant coffee that tasted like campfire ashes, then got back to work. The sun was bright, and the air had that crisp edge that only happens right before everything turns truly cold. A couple hours in, Reed stopped swinging and pointed off to the side of the trail. "You see that?" he asked. At first, I thought it was a pile of sticks, maybe a fallen log, but as we got closer, it became clear what it really was, or at least what it had been. A deer, or what was left of one. But it did not look natural. There was no blood, no torn flesh. The skin had been peeled back like a jacket, clean and intact, as if someone had made a single precise cut and just pulled. The ribs were bare, picked clean. But nothing had been chewed, no bite marks, no torn ligaments. It looked dry, almost old, but it had not been there long. The grass underneath it was still pressed down. "Coyotes," Reed said. But his voice did not match the word. There were no tracks around it, no drag marks. No signs of a struggle. Just the two of us, standing there, and our own boot prints leaving in and out. We moved on, but the silence between us got heavier. Maybe an hour later, we came across a patch of forest that just felt wrong, like it did not match the rest. A dozen trees, maybe more, each with a thick black ring burned into the trunk at exactly the same height, about waist level. The rings were perfect, smooth, too smooth. But there was no sign of fire anywhere else. No scorched branches, no ash, no smell. The moss that grew along the bark did not seem touched. Only that one spot on each trunk, like someone had looped a branding iron around them. I said, "I have never seen fire do that." Reed did not answer. He just kept walking. That night, we did not build a fire. He told me not to, said the smoke might draw attention. Maybe a ranger, maybe someone with a drone. But the look on his face said something different, like he did not want to risk lighting anything up. Not here. We ate cold beans out of the can and barely spoke. Around midnight, I woke up drenched in sweat. My sleeping bag felt like a furnace, but the air outside was cold. Freezing even. I could not hear anything. No owls, no wind, no bugs. Just this dead, crushing stillness that felt heavier than silence. I opened my eyes and knew immediately something was off. I did not hear anything move, no branches snapping, no animals rustling, But I had that feeling, deep and solid in my gut, that someone was watching me. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Then I unzipped the side of my tarp just a few inches and looked out. Reed's tarp was empty. I whispered his name. No response. I slipped out barefoot and clicked on my flashlight, aiming it low. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet away, perfectly still, facing me. His arms hung at his sides like he did not know what to do with them. I whispered his name again. He did not answer, did not move. Then he took a step back, then another. He did not turn, did not stumble. He just started walking backward, one careful step at a time, retreating into the shadows between the trees like something was pulling him on invisible strings. I did not move. I stayed rooted in place until the sun started rising. He never came back. I packed everything that morning except his tarp. I could not bring myself to touch it. It did not feel like it belonged to him anymore. I tried to follow the trail we had cleared, but nothing looked right. The turns were off. The landscape did not match what I remembered. Every time I checked my compass, it pointed somewhere different. I passed those burned ring trees again, twice, even though I was walking in the opposite direction. It was like the woods were folding in on themselves, reshuffling when I was not looking. By midday, I was out of water. My lips were cracked. My legs were screaming. I sat down on a flat rock and pulled out my phone even though I knew it would not help. And then I heard his voice. Behind me, "Hey man, you good?" I froze. Then from my left, "Trail's clear this way." Then from my right, "Don't get turned around." Same voice, same tone. Calm, like he was still standing there grinning at me with a beer in his hand. But it was not him. It sounded like someone had learned how to wear his voice. Like it had been listening and decided to try it on. I shut my eyes and counted to 100. Slow. When I opened them, everything was quiet again. I did not look back. I just picked a direction, any direction, and walked. Eventually, I heard a hum in the distance, a generator, faint but real. I followed it like a lifeline. I stumbled out of the woods sometime in the late afternoon and collapsed outside a ranger station. They wrapped my feet, gave me water, called me lucky. I told them my cousin wandered off. They said they would send someone to check, but did not find anything. The three of us had spent most of our lives in the foothills around that area. Camping trips were as normal as grabbing a burger after school or sneaking into old drive-in lots to hang out. We weren't survivalists, but we knew our way around the woods, or at least we thought we did. That sense of confidence, maybe arrogance, is probably what got us in trouble. We'd done weekend hikes and a few multi-day trips, always sticking to marked trails. We were always near enough to civilization that, if something went sideways, we could find our way out. But that summer, something shifted. We wanted more of a challenge. We wanted to go off script. So we planned a 3-day trek, cutting straight off the standard route into the deep woods. No signage, no mapped campsites, no rescue markers. Just the three of us, our packs, and the assumption we'd be back by Sunday night. We told our parents the basics, where we were starting and when we'd check in. We brushed off their half-hearted warnings with the kind of casual bravado only teenagers can get away with. The first day felt like freedom. The forest swallowed the trail behind us within minutes. Everything felt bigger once we left the marked path. Hills were steeper, brush thicker, trees in dense, uneven clusters. It felt untouched, wild in a way I hadn't experienced before. Every so often we stopped and stood there, listening. It was exhausting, but in a good way, like we were earning something. By the time the sun dipped below the hills, we were ready to stop. We found a small clearing beside a narrow creek, set up our tents, and got a small fire going. The ground was damp and a little spongy under our sleeping pads, but we were too tired to care. That first night should have felt peaceful. The running water had that soft, steady sound that usually knocks me right out. But I couldn't shake a sense that the woods were a little too quiet. Not silent, just watchful. Like there was weight behind the stillness. Nothing I could explain. Just a low-level unease sitting in my chest. While collecting firewood, I wandered a bit farther upstream and noticed something weird. There was a tree, wide and old-looking, just past the bank. Its bark had been gouged in a spiral pattern, Deep cuts winding upward in clean, almost rhythmic lines, not fresh, but not weathered either. They were deep enough that I could press my fingers into them without touching bark on the other side. It didn't look like natural damage, not like anything I'd seen before. I called Eli and Marcus over. Eli shrugged and said, "Probably a bear." He sounded unconcerned. Marcus glanced, then turned back to the fire. "Bear climbed up, that's all," he tossed over his shoulder. I wanted to accept that. I really did. But I'd seen bear markings before, jagged, rough, chaotic. These were sharp and deliberate. Too even. I stared at those grooves longer than I probably should have, then forced myself to walk away. The next morning, things started to feel off. We woke to find our gear slightly rearranged. Nothing dramatic, no torn packs or missing supplies. But our stuff wasn't where we'd left it. My sleeping bag was unzipped halfway, even though I remembered closing it tight before crashing. Eli's pack was tilted on its side with the top flap open. Marcus found his water filter taken out and set neatly beside the stove kit. All the zippers, opened and closed, nothing missing. Even the granola bars in an outside pouch were still there. It was like someone, or something, had gone through our things and put them back. "Raccoons," Eli mumbled, but without conviction. "Raccoons don't open zippers and close them again," I said. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, just stating a fact. No one argued. No one wanted to. We packed quickly and kept going, heading deeper into the hills. At first, the trail, or what we thought was a trail, seemed to lead somewhere, but the terrain became unpredictable. Steep ridges, sudden drops, thorny underbrush that hadn't been disturbed in years. There were no signs of other hikers, no footprints, no worn-down logs, no broken branches to follow. At one point, we passed a crooked birch tree with a split right down the middle. Nothing special, just one of those weird-looking trees that sticks in your memory. We crossed it and moved on. About an hour later, we passed it again. Same split. Same knot on the left side. None of us said anything at first. Then Marcus muttered, "We must be looping," and picked up the pace. That should have calmed me down. Maybe we'd turned around without realizing it, but his face told a different story. He looked pale and tight-lipped. He kept looking over his shoulder like he was trying to spot someone behind us. That night, we didn't talk much. We built a bigger fire and sat closer to it than usual. No one said we were scared. We just were. Sometime after midnight, I woke cold, heart pounding with no idea why. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. I lay still, trying to figure out what had startled me, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, crunching just beyond the light, not rushing, not hiding, just walking, pacing like someone was circling us. Not a deer, not a bear, not anything trying to avoid detection. I sat up quietly and whispered Marcus's name. The second I spoke, the footsteps stopped. Everything went still. Not just quiet, dead still, like the forest had exhaled and decided to hold its breath. I didn't leave the tent. I couldn't. I sat there, frozen, listening. My body was tense, palms damp, chest tight. I stayed that way until I must have passed out from exhaustion. Next morning, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept at all. He said he'd dreamed someone kneeling at the foot of his sleeping bag, tugging gently at his boots. We tried to laugh it off. But when he went to tie them, the laces were already undone. He swore up and down he'd tied them tight before bed. We didn't joke after that. We all agreed, without really saying it, that we needed to get out, head back, find the trail, follow the sun if we had to. But every path we took led us deeper. Ridges dropped into hollows identical to ones we'd already crossed. We found the crooked birch a third time, then a fourth. By late afternoon, we stumbled into a clearing none of us recognized. It was wide, open, and too quiet. In the middle sat a perfect ring of stones, maybe 10 feet across. Not jagged or random, smooth, uniform, fitted together like someone had spent serious time arranging them. Inside the circle, the dirt was bare. No grass, no leaves, no twigs. Just smooth, swept earth. We didn't go near it. None of us said a word. We turned away and picked the direction at random, walking as fast as we could. That night, we didn't bother with a fire. We sat huddled in the dark, backs to each other, listening to every shift in the underbrush. Then the footsteps came back. Same pace, same rhythm, just outside the reach of our headlamps. Circling us in wide, deliberate loops. never coming closer, never backing away. Tyler, who hadn't said much all day, was shaking. I could hear his teeth click. Marcus breathed fast, hands clenched in his lap. I didn't even try to sleep. None of us did. We waited for the sun like it was a lifeline. When morning finally came, we started walking. No plan, just kept moving. After what felt like hours, I saw thin slashes of light ahead. Through the trees, a strip of asphalt. The highway. None of us cheered. No one said a word. We walked faster until we reached the edge and stepped onto the shoulder. Gravel under our boots never felt so solid. That was enough. I haven't been back since. I haven't camped, and I haven't hiked beyond where I can see the road. I was 19 when it happened. My cousin Maddox had asked me to help him check on this old hunting cabin he kept up past the last switchback. Deep in the hills outside of Graver Hollow, we loaded up his truck with what we needed: flashlights, food, sleeping bags, a couple rifles we didn't expect to use, just precaution. Maddox had been saying for a while that he wanted to check for squatters or storm damage. Basically make sure the place hadn't been overrun by raccoons or teenagers. We took the dirt road until the trees thickened and narrowed the sky to a sliver. After that, we hiked. The trail wound through steep switchbacks and shady ridgelines, chewing up the afternoon faster than we planned. At first, it was easy. We joked about mountain lions, old hermits, and what we'd do if the cabin had somehow fallen through the earth. Dumb stuff to pass the time, but as the trees closed in and the path got looser underfoot, more rocks, more sliding dirt, the talking stopped. You know how it goes. The deeper you get into woods that don't care if you're there, the more you go quiet without thinking about it. The cabin was still standing, somehow. It looked like something that had held its breath through decades of weather and forgotten seasons. One shutter clung to the frame like it was afraid of falling. The door hung half open, not broken exactly, but not fully closed either. Maddox circled around back to check the hunting blind in the foundation, and I stepped inside. Same as I remembered. Same smell of old smoke that never fully left the wood. Same cot against the wall, worn through in the middle. Same kettle on the table, stained and dented like someone had once tried to clean it and gave up halfway through. Cobwebs in the corners. Dust on the windows. I brushed off the cot, more out of muscle memory than intention. Everything inside felt still. Too still. I heard a creak near the stove and told myself it was the wind. Something scratching faintly under the floor? Mice. Definitely mice. Maddox mumbled something from outside, maybe talking to himself, maybe talking to me. Hard to tell. We set down our packs and ate with that kind of silent urgency that means you want to get through the meal and move on. No campfire. Just dry bites and a shared flask of water. Then came the part I still can't explain. I heard Maddox's boots on two sides of the cabin at the same time. At first, I thought I was misjudging the direction. Maybe sound was bouncing weird off the trees, but it wasn't just the footsteps. I heard him muttering, same cadence, same rhythm, same words, but the voice was coming from behind the cabin, and also from the front steps. Like someone had taken a recording of him and was playing it, just out of sync. The version from the steps was a half beat behind, too precise, too slow. Like it was trying to copy him but didn't quite understand timing. I stood there listening, waiting for the echo to fade, or for it to resolve into something normal, but it didn't. I went to the door, tried to keep my voice easy. "You good?" I called out. "Yeah, just checking," he said from behind the cabin. But the voice on the front steps kept going, saying the same thing, matching his tone exactly. And there was no one standing there, just the porch and the dirt trail. Maddox came back around a minute later. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us made a joke. That's when I started feeling it, that slow, crawling awareness that something was off, but not in the way you can name. Like the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for us to acknowledge it. We didn't. We just moved through the tasks like we were supposed to be there. We shut the door tight, closed the leaning shutter as best we could, stacked some wood, checked the corners, but I avoided the porch. It felt like standing on it meant something. Something. Night came heavy and full, the kind that settles on your shoulders and makes every noise sharper. We turned off the flashlights and laid down, rifles close. Neither of us really slept. At some point I must have dozed, because the next clear thing I remember was waking up to Maddox's voice calling my name from outside. Drawn out, playful, just loud enough to be heard, the way he says it when he's being a smartass. But he was right there next to me, still breathing slow and steady. I reached down, touched his arm, and shook him awake. He blinked, looked at me, and then we both heard it again. His own voice from the front steps calling my name. Steady, patient. It didn't sound scared or angry, just expectant. We jumped up, grabbed the rifles, turned on every flashlight we had, and opened the door. There was nothing there. The sound moved as we stepped out just a little deeper into the trees. Like it was backing away, keeping just out of reach. It called again. Same voice, same cadence. Like it knew us. Like it was waiting. We didn't follow. We slammed the door shut, wedged a chair under the knob, and waited out the night. No sleep, just the slow grind of time and the occasional shifting of wood as something walked the perimeter. At dawn, the world looked wrong. Not scary, just too calm. Then we saw the ground. Around the cabin, the earth was marked. Wide, dragging lines. Not prints. Not tracks. Just deep scours. Almost circular, like something heavy had moved around the building over and over. Not a raccoon. Not a bear. Nothing I've ever seen moves like that. We didn't talk much on the way back. I think we were both afraid saying anything out loud would make it more real. By the time we reached the truck, it felt like the trail had rearranged itself. I kept looking over my shoulder. Maddox kept his hand near the rifle the whole time. He never went back to the cabin. He got married that winter, started a new job, sold the truck a few months later. When I asked him about that night, he'd shrug and change the subject. But I know he remembers. Because I do, and I still hear the voice sometimes. Not often. Just now and then. I'll be walking near trees, nothing deep, just some park trail or behind an apartment complex, and I'll hear Maddox's voice calling my name in that same rhythm. Slow, familiar, patient, and there's never anyone there. I started wearing earbuds, carrying a flashlight even in daylight. I time my steps so there's no gap, no rhythm for something else to match. I didn't tell my cousin I still hear it. What would be the point? We don't talk about the cabin anymore. It's still there probably, still leaning in the trees, still waiting. People have asked me about the story. When I've told little pieces of it, they laugh or they say it sounds like something I made up. A friend once told me I should turn it into a short film. But I'm not telling it for entertainment. I'm telling it because, whatever that was, it knew how to sound like someone I trust. Exactly like him. Not close, not similar. Exactly. It didn't try to trick me in a flashy way. It didn't knock or rattle or howl. It just waited. It called me by name and waited for me to come to it. And I wonder all the time, what would have happened if I had stepped onto the porch? If I'd followed that voice just a few paces into the trees? I was 20 when I picked up a summer job working for this land survey outfit that specialized in forgotten properties, old plots buried deep in the Appalachian backwoods. My main task was to hike to remote boundaries, half of which hadn't been checked in decades. Log coordinates, snap a few photos, and move on. The company was small, based out of a town no one's ever heard of, Wickler, I think, and the guy who hired me was the kind who didn't talk much. He just handed over field assignments with a stapled printout and a nod. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, liked that I was paid decent money to wander around places so overgrown they barely remembered people existed. That sense of being the first person in years, maybe decades, to walk through a patch of land. It had a strange pull to it. That morning I left before sunrise. I drove out past the last gas station, through two towns with more boarded windows than open ones. The paved road faded to gravel, and eventually gravel turned to dirt, weaving between hills that grew steeper and more claustrophobic the farther I went. By the time the track ended, I was deep enough in that even the GPS signal flickered. I parked the truck at a little clearing that had clearly been used before, flat enough for tires, some sun-bleached beer cans in the weeds, and locked it up behind me. The assignment was simple. I had to follow a narrow creek listed as Little Weaver Branch on the topo map for about 3 miles. At the end point, there was supposed to be an old iron boundary marker set back from the water. Photograph it, log the coordinates, and head back. They told me there were no standing structures out there. No cabins. No maintained trails. Just pure forest, the kind of place even hunters had stopped going a long time ago. I started off in a good mood. Weather was decent. Pack wasn't too heavy, and I liked having the creek as a natural guide. It ran along my left as I moved uphill and east, the gurgling sound of weird comfort. I remember the trees feeling dense but not oppressive, at least not yet. I walked for maybe an hour, stopping here and there to check the map and make sure I hadn't veered off course. But then something about the creek caught my attention. It's hard to explain, but the flow looked wrong, like the current was syncing with my movement. The faster I walked, the faster it rushed. When I slowed down, it almost lagged. I told myself it was just an illusion. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks, or the terrain made it seem that way. Still, I pulled out my compass to double check. The needle wobbled. Not in a steady spin, not broken, but twitching. It danced in place, like it couldn't pick a direction. I set it down on a rock, thinking maybe my body was interfering, but no luck. It kept quivering. I figured maybe there was iron in the soil or something. Mountains do weird things to magnetic fields, right? I pushed on, telling myself I'd be at the marker soon. Then I saw the first tree. It stood just off the creek, bark flaking in gray strips. At first I thought someone had carved initials, maybe left a message, but as I got closer I saw they were just tallies. Straight, vertical lines. Not grouped in fives like you'd expect, just scattered up the trunk in no real pattern. Some of them were shallow and old, faded into the bark, but others were fresh, sharp, sap still wet around the edges. It unsettled me, not because they were there, but because of how deliberate they looked. There wasn't anything random about it. Someone had been keeping count. Of what? I didn't want to guess. I kept walking. Maybe 100 feet, and saw another tree. Same marks, but more of them. Then another tree with even more. It felt like following someone's ongoing count, moving deeper into the woods with every stroke of the knife. The air started to feel thicker, like it clung to me. I shrugged it off, told myself to focus. I'd gone too far to turn back without finishing the job. My feet started hitting patches of ground that felt soft in the wrong way, like I was walking on hidden layers. And then the land dipped again, deeper than the map suggested. I should have been on a gentle slope, but instead I found myself stepping down into a hollow. That's when I saw the rocks. They were sticking out of the ground like broken teeth, arranged in a square, rough and uneven, but too symmetrical to be natural. At first I thought they were just old stones, maybe a collapsed wall, but the closer I looked, the more it resembled the outline of a foundation. Whatever had stood there was long gone, no wood, no metal, but the shape remained. Then I saw the boots. Inside the stone square, lined up side by side, were 4 pairs of boots. Worn, weather-beaten, but upright. They weren't randomly dumped or scattered. They were placed there, carefully, toes all pointing forward, like someone had arranged them. I stared for too long before I realized there were more. Behind me, half buried in dead leaves, I spotted a child-sized pair. Further back, others, bigger, smaller, different styles, but all similarly aged. Not fresh, but also not rotted the way leather usually gets after years outside. My scalp prickled. The kind of unease that creeps in slow but doesn't let go. I backed away, not sure what I was walking through anymore, but I couldn't leave yet. I hadn't found the marker. I turned to follow the creek again, though at that point, I wasn't entirely sure I was even walking in the same direction. The trees had shifted. I recognized the fallen log I'd passed earlier, only now it was split down the middle. A break I swore hadn't been there before. My map might as well have been a napkin sketch. None of it matched what I was seeing. Then, just as I was about to turn around, I saw a roof line through the trees, a cabin, not marked on the map, not mentioned in the job notes. It leaned slightly to one side, the boards dark with age and rain. No windows, just 2 square holes where they probably used to be. No door either, just a frame. No sign of smoke or human life. I should have walked away. Every part of me knew better, but I stepped closer. I called out, just a simple, hello, and felt ridiculous when my voice echoed too loud. Nothing answered. No birds, no bugs, not even the creek. The floor creaked as I stepped in, but it held. The smell hit me instantly. Damp wood, mildew, something faintly metallic. The floor was covered in clothing, not just a shirt or two piles. Layers, folded jackets, trousers slumped in corners, old coats hanging limply off nails. None of it modern. Wool vests, plaid patterns, high collars, stuff you'd see in black and white photos from 50 years ago. I felt like I was walking into a closet frozen in time. Then I saw the names. They were carved into the walls. Not scribbled. Carved. Deep. Deliberate. First names mostly. Some repeated 2 or 3 times. Some unfinished. The knife strokes cutting off mid-letter. Hundreds of them. There was no space left on some boards. I remember following the line of names with my eyes, trying to figure out if there was a pattern, some kind of list. When I heard the faintest shift behind me, and when I turned around, she was there, standing in the doorway. I don't know how to describe her without sounding crazy. She looked like a woman, tall, pale dress, long black hair hanging straight down, but she didn't seem real. She didn't move, didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly, like she was listening for something. Her arms hung loosely, palms facing me. There was nothing threatening in her posture. That somehow made it worse. My whole body locked up. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just stared. Then something in me snapped, and I bolted. I ran straight through the doorway, past her, half expecting to feel cold fingers brush my skin, but there was nothing, just the trees swallowing me again. I crashed through branches, tripped over roots, scraped my arms and face, but I didn't stop. I kept my ears trained on the sound of the creek, the only guide I trusted anymore. The compass on my chest bounced wildly, the needle spinning out like it had given up trying. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, I broke through the tree line and stumbled into the clearing. My truck was still there, same as I left it, sunlight glinting off the hood like it belonged to a different world. I threw my pack into the bed and didn't bother checking what fell out. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys the first time. Got them in the second try, and peeled out so fast I left a trail of dust behind me. It took 10 minutes of climbing the ridge before my phone buzzed back to life. 1 bar. Enough. I called the office and told them I was done. Didn't care about the money. Didn't want another assignment. I didn't give them an explanation. Just hung up and kept driving. Jonah, my cousin, had this idea that summer, something bigger than our usual hikes. He wanted to push deeper into the Appalachian backcountry than either of us had ever gone. Like, really deep. Past the maintained trails, past the spots with cairns or old blaze marks, past even where hunters usually bother to roam. That was just Jonah. He was always chasing something unspoken, like the edge of a map wasn't just a limit, it was a challenge. I was more of a know where your next meal and shower are kind of guy, but I went with him. I usually did. Maybe it was the way he talked about it, or maybe I just didn't want to be the guy who said no and then heard he got lost out there alone. We planned for 3 nights. Packed freeze-dried meals, water filters, a compact stove, a weatherproof tent. I brought a GPS logger, a little device about the size of a matchbox that maps your trail as you go. It had this feature where you could review the route on a tiny screen or plug it into your laptop later to overlay it on a map. I'd used it before. Never failed me. The morning we set out, the ranger at the check-in station barely looked up from his crossword. We filled in the logbook, signed our names. Just before we left, another ranger, older guy, deeply sunburnt nose, smelled faintly of tobacco, looked over and said, not really loud, "You boys picked land no map bothers with." He kind of smirked, but the tone was weird. It stuck with me. Jonah? He just grinned like someone had paid him a compliment and walked out the door. By noon, we'd left the last recognizable trail. The brush closed in fast, and the forest started doing that thing where it feels like it's closing ranks behind you. Dense stands of hemlock, thickets of rhododendron that swallowed the sun. We had to scramble up loose scree in spots, wade through knee-deep mud in others, It was slow going, but Jonah didn't seem to mind. He said that's how you know it's real, when the land stops pretending to be convenient. I started noticing it that first evening. Little things. A tree that didn't match the elevation. Moss growing in a direction that didn't match the sun. A chunk of hillside that looked recently disturbed, like a landslide had passed through and then been erased. But I chalked it up to being tired and sore. That always messes with your perception. We set up camp at a hollow between two ridgelines. Nice spot. Flat ground, thick canopy above. A clear little creek about 30 feet away for water. We made a fire pit from some nearby rocks and had a quiet dinner. No wildlife to speak of, no deer, no squirrels, not even a raccoon trying to raid our packs, but it didn't feel empty, just restrained. That night, I woke up all at once. You know that sudden bone-deep alertness? No dreams, no tossing, just awake. And it took me a second to realize what was wrong. Silence. Not just the absence of noise, the kind of silence that presses on your ears, like you're underwater or in a vacuum. No crickets, no breeze, no water sounds from the creek. It was like the world had been muted. I sat up slowly, blanket pulled tight. I wasn't sweating, I was freezing. Which didn't make sense. Summer in those mountains is humid, warm even at night. But the cold clung to me, sharp and dry. Jonah was still out. I could hear him breathing. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The air had that heavy, pre-thunderstorm stillness. But there were no clouds. I looked around the camp, just trying to reassure myself everything was where we left it. And that's when I saw it. The tree line had shifted. I didn't even realize it at first. I was looking at the poplar that had been on our east side earlier. Only now it was behind the tent, on the west. A clump of saplings I remembered near the fire pit gone. And the fire pit itself, it wasn't right. The rocks were scattered. No ash, no charred wood, just disturbed dirt, like we hadn't built anything at all. I reached for my phone, hoping to check the time. Dead. No response. Not even the low battery screen. I clicked the power button a few times, then held it down. Nothing. I walked over to where the creek had been. No sound. No shimmer of water through the trees. When I got there, the bed was dry, not damp, not reduced. Dry. The rocks were dry, the leaves untouched. It looked like water hadn't touched the ground in years. I turned to go back, and then I saw it. A pale light was seeping up from the forest floor. Not moonlight. Not even close. It was low and cold, and it pooled in weird places, like water might if the ground dipped in odd ways. And it moved. Not flickering, not swaying. Moving. Like it was alive. Sliding around the roots and trunks, careful not to be seen too quickly. The air began to vibrate. I could feel it in my teeth, this low, broken thrum layered under a high-pitched whine. It reminded me of an old engine trying to turn over after sitting in a garage for a decade. I backed up toward the tent, but something shifted in the glow. A shape. I stopped moving. It was tall. Really tall. Lanky, but not like a human. Its proportions were off. Too long in some places, too short in others. And it didn't walk. It hitched. Like it was jerking forward in tiny bursts. Every time it moved, the light around it warped slightly. I didn't think. I just turned and ran up the slope, except the slope wasn't there. My foot went down on what should have been solid ground, and I fell, hard. Only I didn't hit anything, just dropped, like gravity had let go of me. Cold air rushed past and I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My arms flailed, but there was nothing to grab onto. And then, nothing. I woke up to the sound of my alarm. The digital chirp I'd set before bed. I was back in the tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag. Jonah snored beside me. Sunlight filtered through the nylon. The creek was back, rushing, cheerful, alive. I got out slowly, checking the camp. Fire pit, intact. Same rocks. Blackened wood, even a bit of unburned marshmallow on a stick. Everything looked untouched, except it wasn't. I grabbed my GPS tracker and checked the overnight log. It had been running, just like I left it. But the data told a different story. Multiple restarts between midnight and 3 a.m. Like someone had turned it off and on, again and again. Then, nothing. A blank spot. 3 hours of missing data. I didn't say anything to Jonah. I just walked down to the creek. That's where I found the worst part. Right along the edge, parallel to the water, was a strip of bone-dry ground. Perfectly straight, maybe 4 feet wide. Leaves brittle, unbent. No moisture, no dew. It was like something had been there, something massive, and then disappeared. We packed up fast. Jonah didn't ask why. He moved like he felt it too. We made it back to the ranger station by early evening. Didn't say much on the hike out, just kept walking. I thought maybe I was losing it, that it was some kind of dream or hallucination, lack of sleep maybe. But then the next morning, Jonah looked at me over breakfast and said, "Hey, did you smell it?" I just stared at him. He rubbed his arms, made a face, like burnt marshmallows, sweet and kind of chemical. It was all over my clothes when I woke up. He didn't know I'd smelled it too. I hadn't told him. I'd washed my shirt twice and still caught the scent. We never went back.